Fáilte. Welcome to the Village Oak Tree. I'm your host, Terrance Ó Domhnaill. Thank you for joining me again this week. I'm going to keep on with more doings from around the world this week. Rather than a bunch of news headlines, I have a couple of videos to share this week. Not that I'm going to play them for you. They would take up far too much time, but I will link them in my commentary on Substack and Medium for anyone who wants to watch them. I will show you the headlines, though. What they tell us is how bad things are getting around the world. The political landscape is rapidly changing everywhere, and not for the good, even in Russia. The political landscape is starting to turn the other way now regarding the war in Ukraine. Big changes are coming for all of us soon, no matter where we live on this planet. So gather around, sit you down somewhere comfortable, and I'll bring you some more stories from outside your village. So to start with, let me pull this story up here. President Putin of Russia said back on May 9th during their World War II victory parade and holiday that he is looking to an end of the Ukraine conflict soon. Take that however you want. I got this from RT News in Russia. I also read another Western news piece last week that said the Russian people are tiring of the war and grumbling about making an end to it. Too many Russian lives have been lost now, and it's time to end this one way or another. CNN reports that Putin is now very afraid of a possible coup attempt and has upgraded his security protocols, if you can believe anything CNN says anymore. Not that the Ukrainians haven't lost a lot as well, but as I said last week, the main reason that a war from the Ukrainian perspective and a special military operation from the Russian government's perspective didn't end back in 2022 was because of European Russophobia and greed. Now the EU is scrambling for a way to end this with a defeat for the Russians. Not going to happen without the help of the Americans, and being able to do so without bankrupting their economies, which is happening anyway, with or without the war. So to kind of address that a little bit, let's talk about this. Russia has submitted one steadfast proposal to end to Ukraine and the EU in order for this to come to an end, which is for the Ukrainian military to leave Donbass, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, Kherson regions and let the people living there decide whether they want to remain with Ukraine or join the Russian Federation, which they had already decided back in 2022. That is to be believed. The West seems to think that this was coerced by the Russians, as they had previously voted back in 1991 to remain with Ukraine when Ukraine had its independence referendum. I'm all for letting people make their own decisions without any coercion from either side. Maybe letting the UN be the arbitrators once the militaries have been withdrawn. But would the EU go for that? Probably not. These wealthy elitist EU counselors and leaders are not likely to let that happen, as they stand to personally lose too much. Perish the thought, they might actually be voted out by the peacemakers. Can't have that, can we? Can you imagine Ursula von der Leyen being told her services are no longer required and told to go home, along with Kaja Kallas? How about the ADF taking a majority control of the Bundestag in Germany and voting Friedrich Merz out? We already know that Francis Macron is finished. He's just serving out his term now. Elise Meloni has also lost some of her popularity of late, is working to turn that around, miffing some of her EU Council supporters lately. We all heard about how the Hungarian people just voted out the Fidesz party and Viktor Orban in the lavish praising for the new EU favoring prime minister. Times are changing in Europe now. Then there's the United States. Everyone around the world knows what's going on there, as Trump hogs the news cycles every day now. He continually broadcasts what he's thinking and doing on a daily basis. He also changes his mind on a whim, sometimes several times a day as well. But this isn't about Trump so much as it is about the politics in the United States. That's what's changing rapidly with the help of the conservative factions in the country, to include a lot of high court justices around the country. I'm also talking about the 3 federal Supreme Court justices and the other 3 who go along because that's the political thing to do, despite all of them supposedly being impartial to partisanship. For them, the lure of donor money has been too good to resist in the case of a couple of them, maybe even all 6 of them. The latest judicial blows for the Democrats to secure a possible large, if not supermajority in the House, and maybe even take back the Senate, took a major setback last week. Now, not only is gerrymandering taken off like wildfire in several southern states, it's likely to also start in some of their MAGA Republican states out in the Midwest, if they can figure out a way to make it happen. The Democrats are aghast at the rapid pace of this is all happening, so they say. But had they been paying attention, they would have seen that the MAGA Republicans had all this prepped and ready to go if the courts ruled in their favor. The Democrats only have themselves to blame. They can't seem to get behind a solid message to focus on that will get people's attention. All the voters see is a lot of confusion and no coherent message. That, and they see a lot of wealthy millionaire politicians who are only out to protect their political positions in order to keep their money intact, especially the ones who are rabid Israeli promoters. Yeah, you know who you are. Meanwhile, as a couple of very astute political analysts pointed out on last weekend on MS Now, which I will show you a screenshot here. The white MAGA Republicans are trying to set up an apartheid state, much like the Afrikaners from South Africa had and Israelis and Palestinians have right here in the United States. According to their analysis, these Southern politicians want to return to a time before the first Civil War, when the white, wealthy Southern plantation owners controlled the area of the U.S. known as the Confederacy, with an authoritarian oligarchy-style government. No more democracy, but apartheid states, each run by a white majority over a majority non-white population. Given how fast these white politicians in Louisiana, Tennessee, and Alabama are moving, with Florida close behind, if they're successful as far as the courts are concerned, there will be a lot more states that will follow suit. Not in time for the midterms, but most certainly for 2028. As someone pointed out in this news segment, whatever dirty tricks we're seeing right in front of us now, just ahead of the November elections, we can expect this political war for control of the United States to gather steam. And then they will have another year or so to trot out more of their dirty tricks to subvert any future elections in their favor. I've said this before, and I'm not the only one. The days of uncontested, free and fair elections in the United States are over. This is just getting started. I replied to someone's article a few days ago about what that might look like. In the best case scenario would be that the Democrats win both the House and the Senate in November, then the presidency in 2028. Then the MAGA Republicans can be largely dismantled and their ideology sent back to the basement for another few years. The worst case scenario is that these white Republicans to manage to completely take over enough states and their districts to retake the Congress in 2028, making any Democrat elected to the White House a lame duck from his first day in office. The voters get another Mike Johnson as the Speaker of the House, and the Southern oligarchs a win for their states. What's likely to happen is something in the middle, something the Americans have had in their Congress for a couple of decades now. A closely partisan Congress, much like what they have now, where one side wins for a couple of years, then the other wins for another couple of years, with neither side ever able to actually do anything for their districts as far as the basic necessities are concerned. You know, little things like food stability, access to healthcare, schools, infrastructure, and so on, while each one tries to outdo the other for control in a perpetual battle. The American governance system is at a near impasse anymore. These elected officials have been so corrupted by the easy access to millions of corporate donors, they've lost sight of why they were elected in the first place. Now we can add to that election rigging to stay in power for as long as anyone can see into the future. I'm not just talking about the MAGA Republicans. There are plenty of fat cat Democrats who would do nearly anything to stay in power as well. The voters are seeing this for the first time in a long time, and they're getting mad. This will turn into more voters going to the polls in November to get rid of the corrupt government and hopefully some relief with the economy. If the Republicans manage to get away with massive voter suppression in November and the voters figure it out, the backlash will be huge. But will all that anger turn into results? Not if the MAGA Republicans can help it. To them, because of the recent state and federal Supreme Court decisions, this opens the doors for them to go after voter suppression even more in the run-up to 2028. Remember what I said. The gloves are off now, so they think. And they are, unless the people can figure out a way to stop them. Tennessee is just the beginning, along with Louisiana. Alabama's working on it, with Mississippi right behind them. Florida, as I mentioned earlier, is also working on it. Texas is also working hard at it, but with a lot less success so far. Then there are the other states that are watching carefully. South Carolina, Missouri, Indiana, Ohio, Arkansas, West Virginia, North Carolina is also an in-between states along with Virginia's rural areas. The sons of the modern Confederacy appear to be hard at work trying to bring back the Old South using modern politics instead of guns this time. My question is, will it finally work? Will these southern states finally get what they've always wanted since their ancestors arrived from Europe with land grants from the European kings? A country within a country to be able to do whatever they want at the expense of the non-white population. An apartheid set of states where the wealthy elite, non-majority men, I stress men, are able to rule with impunity without oversight from the northern federal government. Or if that fails, an actual secession again, so they can do all the above after they've figured out how, in their minds, to use the state's resources to maintain their lavish lifestyles at the expense of the non-whites and poor white citizens, much like they did before the first Civil War. That didn't work out so well the last time, and although these states aren't as dependent on agriculture, cotton, as they were the last time, they still don't have enough of an economy to manage without the federal subsidies. Maybe they plan to quietly steal them, kind of like what they're doing now, only out in the open. Or maybe they think they can just roll up and take them, daring anyone to say no. Either way, it won't work very well, like it didn't work the last time. I'm thinking out loud here, but I do think some of these Southern politicians fantasize about this, especially some of those state-level politicians in the old Confederacy. It remains to be seen just how far these wannabe Confederates will go to secure their power between now and 2028. We've seen what they're willing to do out in the open once they're given a green light by the courts. I expect that if you could imagine it, they're going to try it to see how much they can get away with in the near future. We haven't seen it all yet. I think they're just getting started. Question you have to ask yourself if you're an American citizen eligible to vote: how much are you willing to put up with before you say enough is enough? Are you willing to give up free and fair elections just because you happen to like a little authoritarianism? If so, then you probably never traveled outside of North America in your life. Or if you have gone on some international vacation, it was to a safe place, maybe in the Caribbean, Baja Mexico, Western Europe, or somewhere in Asia or the South Pacific. You know, those most favorite resorts for American tourists. Most non-military Americans will never visit a war zone where they might be in any danger somehow. The tour companies like those American tourist dollars, so they won't jeopardize their livelihoods by setting up a resort where their customers might get hurt or die. That's very bad for business. So all of these conservative armchair politicians who think the liberals should be taken out back and shot, or think someone like Donald Trump is just what the United States needs in order to remain the only superpower in the world, have no idea what living under an authoritarian government might look like or feel like. You see the news feeds about how bad the governments in Russia and China are and think, no matter how bad things look in the U.S., that can't happen to them. They're Americans, and therefore exceptional compared to the rest of the world, because the politicians tell them they are. All the while, telling a lot of them, all the while a lot of them are living in rundown farmhouses, slums, trailer parks, rundown apartment complexes, thinking that the MAGA Republicans are going to make their lives better over and above the immigrants and those others with darker skins. That's what their news feeds tell them, along with their favorite politicians. Some of them are the same folks who gave every spare dollar they could to the old televangelists back in the day, hoping to get a prayer from the anointed ones so their God would lift them out of their misery. We can see how that worked out for them. They're still living in their ramshackle homes and trailer parks, still looking for their Savior and praying for the rapture as prophesied in the last chapter of their Bible. Of course, some of the more charismatic preachers are all making bank on all of this. So much for the teachings of their prophet Jesus of Nazareth about moneylenders in the temple. In Western Europe, the war fever against Russia is slowly picking up speed, especially in Germany. Some of you may have seen some of the news stories from Europe and about Germany's major increase in military spending and the attempt to increase the size of the military. Other neighboring countries are also following behind in their near-insane Russophobia. Now, in a latest report, and I'm going to bring up this interview I got from Lena Petrova here. Germany is preparing for war with Russia by 2030. They want their military preparations completed by 2029. My question is whether they will provoke Russia into a war with them. The even bigger question is whether the German people will go along with that. You ask them today, they're saying no. But in a couple of years, after their state media companies have been scaring them about a Russian invasion after Ukraine is finished, I don't know about you. The prospect of a European war with Russia sounds like madness to me. The world has enough trouble with the Middle East to be worried about a larger war in Europe beyond eastern Ukraine. I don't want to talk too much about the Middle East, as anyone with access to some kind of communication device knows what's going on there for the most part. What I'm also seeing, one of the things we're talking about here is Trump rejected the Iranian peace proposal, no surprise. And the situation is at a stalemate, likely until Trump returns from China next weekend. What I'm also seeing in some of the independent and overseas news media is that certain Gulf countries are starting to make moves away from the U.S. and move closer to Russia and China, with one in particular, the UAE, cozying up even more to the U.S. and the West, which will likely mean that the U.S. being able to use military bases in the Gulf region may become severely limited, which I think would be a good thing, considering all those bases got blown up by the Iranians. It's time the United States quits throwing its military weight around and spend some of that defense budget at home. I don't see that happening until the people forcefully tell their Congress members to do that. Americans also need a Congress willing to listen to its voters. That includes the state legislatures and all of the high courts. If these morbidly rich officials won't listen to the people, then is the United States just a democracy in name only? These are some of the questions being asked now around Europe and the Middle East. Hungary just dumped their authoritarian leader for the last 16 years. Maybe that's why the MAGA Republicans are breaking out all the stops to make sure that doesn't happen to Trump and his successor. They're afraid of losing their cushy, prestigious jobs. It's more than that, though. It's about the money and power that they have gathered for themselves. They lose control of the government, then they lose all that power and a lot of that special donor money, and that's what they can't let go of. Same also goes for the leaders of the EU countries. They can't let go of their money and power, so they're inventing a Russian boogeyman to scare the voters in to keep them in power. The trouble with fake boogeyman is that eventually you have to actually produce the boogeyman, or the audience gets bored and moves on to something else. And this is where my last article, or Substack article with video comes in. So the question is, will someone in the EU eventually do something to the Russians in order to produce an actual Russian boogeyman within a couple of years or so? People like Chancellor Merz can stay in power. Maybe a false flag like blowing up an oil pipeline that the Americans did with Nord Stream. Yeah, I've talked about this before. So now it's pretty much out in the open. It's an actual thing. Europe is almost 99% sure this is what's happened over there. Genocide Joe Biden's plan to blame the Russians in order to bring NATO into the war with Russia by blowing up Nord Stream 1 in the Baltic Sea. It didn't work, and the secret is out now. Not that anyone's going to do anything about it, at least for now anyway. Maybe after Trump is gone? The EU is still very much terrified of the US despite their latest posturing. The Netherlands' Mark Rutte, whom Trump humiliated a couple of months ago in Washington, D.C., would never allow anyone to throw any shade on the U.S. regarding this. The current leaders in the EU probably just want the episode to go away and never be brought up again. I hope China humiliates Trump. I mean, I really do. And I hope they send him packing back to the United States next weekend with his tail between his legs. I don't mean publicly humiliate him, but tell him in a polite way that the U.S. has nothing to offer China in any meaningful way. And if Trump won't come to some kind of equitable deal with Iran, they may make some economic moves to force the issue. This latest news about Trump maybe doing something stupid, such as bringing up a weapons deal for Taiwan and Beijing, will definitely not be received very well by Xi Jinping. So will he or won't he? Will we see more temper tantrums on Truth Social after Trump returns home? All of this is starting to become tedious. Where once we ignored the tantrums, they're now becoming irritating. Most Americans, including lawmakers from both parties, are becoming fed up. The Democrats in public and the Republicans in private out of fear of dear leader. And even that is starting to change a little. This latest idea last Monday of deploying a militarized election integrity force to polling stations across the country is getting a lot of attraction in the news. Will he or won't he? That's the question. Will the states allow that? I expect that some will. A lot will protest. I can't answer that question right now because we know how mercurial Trump is. He says something one day and versus himself the next. I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And that's where I'm going to leave it for this week, with more questions than answers as usual regarding Donald Trump. After my break, I have another wonderful seasonal poem from my favorite Bulgarian poet to read to you to finish the week. Sláinte. During this break, I want to take a couple of minutes to explain how you can support this podcast. One way is to become a paid subscriber on my Substack page, which I'll pull up here for you to look at. You can also find the Village Oak Tree on medium.com. And again on YouTube. This is my YouTube channel page, where you can like and subscribe there as well. This podcast is also available in mobile audio podcasts all over the world, such as RSS, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and so many more. The best way is to make a donation using my donations page on my website at crowntobeha.com. You can visit using the QR code in the top left of this video. I also accept donations of any amount in most currencies around the world using Stripe. Website address is also listed in the scrolling banner at the bottom of your screen. If you're listening to an audio version of the podcast and one of the many mobile apps available, use the link in the podcast description. I've made the website more mobile friendly, so go check it out. I hope people watching or listening to this podcast or just reading the commentary on Substack or Medium.com will take a moment to come visit me at crowntobeha.com. I might even have something you like and you want to come back for more. Sláinte. Welcome back. So let me pull up her poem here. I'm going to just share a screen. Make it easy. So like always here, you can read it for yourself. Tell you what, I'll even go full screen and make it a little bit bigger for you. As I've said before, she's from around the area of Sofia, Bulgaria. And she wrote this seasonal poem And then I'll go down to the bottom. It says, I love writing poetic tales about elements in nature. The spring in my hometown is really windy, so I felt inspired to write this poem. And it kind of resonates with me because I tend to celebrate the natural things of this world. So the poem is entitled Wanderer, forever well known, yet never once seen, by Mariana Bosarova. He outran spring storms in furious flight, riding a nameless steed, winged and fast, crossing ravines and the mountain heights, finding lone pathways no traveler passed. He paused for a sip, life-giving and sweet. There through the rocks a bright stream flashed clear, holding him captive, a brief little beat. He drank and then leapt back to the saddle with cheer. Alone he would roam, yet known everywhere, carrying the fragrance of blossoms and grass. Sometimes he'd rush with a sharp, sudden flare, other times spirit-like, fleeting he'd pass. It was a caress through burdened day's haze, through longing and passion, through fire and gleam. 1 week a hot wind and midsummer blaze, next an ice messenger haunting the chimney. With storms he arrived, then lingered and played with ancient melodies, oboe-like and deep, tapping on windows with fingers that swayed like some stray intruder disturbing our sleep. Forever well known, yet never once seen, mounted upon his wild, swift-winged steed, longed for so often, thrice cursed in between. Hey, breezy wanderer, where do you speed? Oh, I will tell you, at first, when I read this, I thought she was talking about a highwayman, like the old days of Ireland. But then I read further and realized she was talking about the wind. In Ireland and before the Christians came, we used to think about the natural things, Mother Earth, Father Sun, Brother Wind, Sister Moon. The indigenous Native Americans here in this country, in the United States, also have similar, things, deities, I guess, if you want to call them that. So it's interesting that even in Bulgaria, these kinds of things transfer around the world. So, Guru Mahagat, I thank you for watching or listening to the show today. I hope you enjoyed it, and you'll return again to listen to me offer a voice to what a lot of people are thinking these days. To say goodbye this week, I will leave you with this quote from the late P.J. O'Rourke. Giving money and power to government is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys. Slán go foill.